Going to the bathroom was always tricky with all this gear on, but I managed a way of doing it without making a huge mess. The hardest part, honestly, was making sure your sidearm attached to your belt didn't pull your pants down. Then it was really hard to get your belt cinched up again to the right tightness, so I recall at some point giving up on undoing the belt at all. I'll save you for the graphic bits, but suffice it to say that it used to be a real balancing act. The reason why it had ever been an issue at all revolved around public restrooms before the collapse. If anyone saw your sidearm when using the bathroom, they would freak out on you. Then they'd run and tell everyone you had a gun, and it would cause a lot of problems. With careful balancing, guys could usually maintain concealment for their sidearms if they only had to go number 1, but number 2 always gave it away if the stalls didn't go to the ground. It was stupid too, because people would complain that you were more dangerous because you had a gun, because they could suddenly see it now. They had never been forced to realize that people had been dangerous all along. They had just been blissfully unaware. They had refused to take the sustainment of their mortality consciously in their hands. But now they had to, because they just couldn't keep their eyes to themselves when they were in the bathroom. Who cares what the person next to you is doing in the bathroom, or what they're deciding to identify as? Just ignore them and go about your business. Leave them alone. Insecure idiots running and crying to other people with guns because there was a person with a gun trying to use the bathroom. Instead of staring at people as they're trying to use the bathroom, why didn't they mature up, get a gun of their own, and mind their own business? Ridiculous. Made simple things like trying to use the bathroom a nightmare. Stalls seldom ever went to the ground, and urinals never concealed anything to begin with. It had a lot to do with my public restroom phobia, even before I concealed carried, and it only got worse from there. The thought of how many people couldn't mind their own business was so frustrating. Then as I got older, everyone acted like the restroom was for talking on your cell phone. I was so glad those days were over. It was all so unnecessary that people couldn't just leave each other alone. Who could use which bathroom, trying to figure out which people were using the bathrooms for reasons they weren't intended for. Couldn't just use the bathroom for its intention and leave everyone else alone. Nope. People had to turn it into a perverted situation. Safety went right out the door and was replaced by people's baseless feelings and emotions. Can't just leave people alone. I used to remind people that it wasn't that long ago where we all had outhouses. It's the same with portable urinals. Why people suddenly have to make everything so complicated in stupid public restrooms. I hated public restrooms so much. I felt just as unsafe as everyone else did, didn't matter who you were. Rarely did they feel safe or sanitary. They were almost always vandalized or out of toilet paper or paper towels, and almost always out of soap. If there were mirrors, forget trying to see anything through them. The water in them didn't work that often, overflowing garbage cans. Plug toilets. The hot air blower things were so loud they gave me headaches and made my hands hurt. Then what were you supposed to do? Go grab the doorknob to get out that everyone else had touched and they hadn't washed their hands? I subconsciously shuddered a bit. I remember simply using my sleeve to open the bathroom doors to get out of the public restroom. People were so disgusting. If there was a paper towel and garbage bin by the door, I would use my drying off paper towel to open the door and drop it in the bin. That's what most sane people did. The problem is other people who use 3 freaking paper towels to dry a few drops of water off their hands. So ridiculous. I was so happy that none of this was an issue anymore. Back to normal, people not freaking perverts all the time. No tolerance for it anymore. As society had matured up really quick, everyone found their own spot to go and just left everyone else alone. When we go camping for the ladies, if we were at a spot any amount of time, we would lash some sticks and a tarp together so they had privacy. No, we did the same, except it was enforceable by the group. Everyone left them alone, or there were immediate consequences, not difficult. I had finished going up to the tree and made sure about 3 times that I was zipped up and looked around and rounded the perimeter of the building. I knew we would fix the ladies up a shelter more permanent as soon as we had a place to go. It really sucked having to deal with this, not having the proper amenities. Wasn't much fun for me either when I would get my stomach cramps. I looked around and the guys had finished pumping diesel and had moved to pumping gasoline into the van. They had a hand pump and were very carefully pumping the fuel into the vehicle. I saw one 5-gallon can with a big D on it that was full. That must have been the diesel. There was a second can that was empty marked G that was the gasoline can. They finished filling up the van and filled up the gas can. This was extremely dangerous because it was easy to blow up your vehicle or the whole gas station if done improperly. You had to make sure that you didn't have any static electricity or anything that could ignite the volatile fuel. There were no safety protocols anymore, and so everyone had to be extra careful. Before the collapse, some states had made mandatory having fuel attendants. It seemed more like a backdoor tax and employment subsidy than anything. Having to rely on other people to pump your gas was beyond idiotic. They legitimately thought people were going to blow themselves up pumping gas when the rest of the states did it 1,000,000 times a day. Gigantic nanny generation was finally over. It would be nice to be able to pump gas normally again, but oh well. It made me wonder at this rate how long it would be until these stations would be out of fuel. There was really only one thing that everyone had to do, which was never pump your fuel into a gas can while it was on a flatbed. No grounding was a big no-no. Besides that, short of smoking a cigarette near the vapors, and you were fine. The guys wrapped up filling the spare gas can and tightened the lid as I scanned and listened, watching what everyone was doing to see where I could help. I went over and helped them put the spare fuel cans back in the truck, and they put new bolts on the fuel ports. I looked to the side and realized there were multiple busted locks on the ground exposed to the elements. They must bust the old locks and put new locks on every time. They were old trucking bolts that once snapped on absolutely had to be chopped off. They had no unlocking mechanism. They were very good for resisting nearly every way to conventionally break them. If you wanted to get through them with any kind of torch, you'd blow yourself up from the fuel anyway. If you use a grinder, the same thing would happen. Likely the grinder would wear out before the bolt anyway, but I think some blades could get through it. They would be expensive and somewhat rare and specialized, though. Gigantic specialized bolt cutters were the only guaranteed way. Gigantic specialized bolt cutters, were still the only guaranteed way. A guy snapped a bolt on the diesel port also, just to lock it. And we pulled everyone in to saddle up. Just before we broke to get in our vehicles, our comms guy from the lead truck told us to switch channels. We did, and everyone mashed their talk buttons a few times to make sure they were keying up properly. Everyone was, so we got in without another word. I was the last to get in and took my backpack off, climbed in, and set it between my legs like always. Chapter 10, Heading North, late morning, day 1. The guy I was riding with reminded me to make sure to leave a can at the gas station, so I did. It was a can of pineapple. I really like pineapple, so that made me sad. As we drove, I tried to think of a new process for how to leave the can trail for the bad guys. I decided on leaving one after every intersection. I still had most of the second box of canned goods and all of the third box. Hopefully we weren't going too much further, but I didn't know. I think I had a good system going. We drove for a few miles and came to another intersection and turned east. I wrestled through the box to find something new to throw and found a one-person portioned dehydrated noodle. This was the kind with the MSG in it, and that stuff made me sick. A favorite of college kids. If this didn't get them going, nothing would. I happily tossed one out the window. Passed by a few more side roads, but they were one way. I threw a noodle pack out anyway.